Alright, the blood atonement is taught by leading elders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, October 12th, 1884. This is a Mormon reprint of 1916. Right here it says 1916. And then we have 1884. This is a copy of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Now these two are tied together, even though you'd think they weren't. So I'm just going to use my camera here and see how this works. Do page by page so you can read that. You might keep in mind this is published the same time that a lot of Mormons are being still prosecuted for polygamy, which they also didn't practice. And I've posted legal transcript testimony showing people like George Smith were practicing polygamy in 1915. This is 1916. I also have Kawiches Gold Mine posted. That's 1914-ish, where they're Mormon polygamy caves. It's a wild world out there. Now, innocent blood is defined in the Polygamy Revelation, which is again tied into this whole doctrine and the event of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. Because Parley Pratt's Mormonism gave him the right to just take that guy's wife and then they were going to take the kids, and he disagreed. The husband disagreed. But Mormon Polygamy Revelation nullifies all existing non-Mormon marriages and contracts, threatens his wife with death, and it defines innocent blood. Which is why at the Mountain Meadows Massacre they had to try and save everyone under 8. If you're Catholic, you sort of think the same way. If you're under a certain age, 7 or 8, no guilt is imputed. It's difficult in a short video to show how blood atonement, Mountain Meadows Massacre, endowments, oaths, Polygamy Revelation are all tied together in this nexus. But in any case, the idea is that sometimes you're so bad that your blood needs to be shed. Well, if you believe in the death penalty for crimes, you're sort of at the edge of blood atonement. Well, we all agree there's many bad people that deserve this penalty. You get into the quandary we are here. The problem is once you give death penalty to a bureaucracy, whether it's the Mormons or the United States federal government, you wind up in this shit world we're living in now. You know, the Mormon tithing system and the death penalty are no different than the income tax and what we do now in the U.S. and have been doing for some years. I'm just arguing you can't do it just because we've done it, and that kind of rambunctiousness you get, whether it's in Blazing Saddles or here, leads just to too much power in too few people's hands, and they get all uppity, and the next thing you know, someone's getting slapped upside the head with a shovel. We're all aware of unrighteous deaths performed by bureaucracies, and this is certainly the best example I know of right here, the Mountain Meadows Massacre. So the murderer's guilt of Pratt was imputed to a bunch of innocent immigrants whose only crime really was from being from the state of Arkansas. So Mormon blood atonement doctrine is so arcane. Guilt is imputed to you by your geography rather than your actual criminal acts. There isn't a scintilla of evidence that these Fancher Baker train did anything like poisoning creeks or snapping heads off of chickens. This stuff is insulting as what Brigham Young did when the children were taken back, and he insulted the children and insulted the people themselves and never went back to the Mountain Meadows and made a Freemason's right angle with his arm. And without saying a word, the entire monument was torn down. So there were no chicken snappings, and there was no letter to Freemasons, Oddfellows, Methodists, etc., in my opinion. That's just a bunch of hooey made up by the Mormons to propagate a myth of the inevitability, the ultimate impossibility of any sort of intervention, that these people truly were guilty because every fact conspired against them, so they must be guilty. Then you, the perp, have all these great stories to tell about chicken snapping and insulting them and talking about guns. This stuff is ridiculous. It's not true. Again, there isn't any physical evidence for these allegations. It's just like words in diaries, but when you read these diaries, they all use the same phrases, which is a curiosity. So you kill the innocent, which are guilty by association. Then you spread these lies about them. You steal all their property, brand hundreds of cows with Christian crosses. You kidnap the children. You bill the United States federal government thousands of dollars for this, taking care of the kids. Make up stories about letters that didn't exist. And I can assure you that no one that left that camp ever returned to that camp, because the people inside the camp would never have relinquished anything if they had any knowledge of what was going to happen next. There was even apostate Mormons with them. And there's no way those people would just relinquish their lives like that, unless they were like perps themselves, which is unlikely. No, they were probably young Mormons trying to flee and were murdered because they hooked up not only with the wrong people, just trying to escape was enough to get you killed. And it is true that the Mormons murdered many people that were trying to flee Mormonism. It's established reality. There's too many people that talk about it. So what we have here is a crime perpetrated against some innocent people whose only crime was being wealthy, the wealthiest wagon train to ever travel across the U.S. In all probability, they had no knowledge of what had even happened with Parley Pratt, and even if they did, even if someone was involved in it, all Brigham Young had to do was have those perps arrested. Brigham Young had just told Van Fleet, a military guy, to head out of town. We'll fight the U.S. government. But somehow these same people are afraid of a bunch of Archies in wagons, and they're going to fight the government. They're going to do guerrilla warfare on the eastern side of the Rockies, and they do it successfully. So there was no fear of Arkansans. This was greed. It was a very wealthy wagon train. All they had to do was arrest the suspects and prosecute them and leave everyone else alone. That's not what happened. They were carefully tracked from the time they entered the city of Salt Lake until they were murdered. George A. Smith was down in the south talking this stuff just before they showed up, and then George Smith and Hamlin are camping next to those very people, inviting them to stay at the Mountain Meadows and describe them as nice people. Yeah, in court, nice people. So they were traveling, in my opinion, completely confused about what was going on as they were heading south and being unable to buy anything and not getting any answers. When they camped down there, they thought they had some relief. Hamlin, it was his property technically at the time, said have a nice vacation down there. But no. And George Smith said to John D. Lee, the old boss Brigham sent me down here. And then he said, Brigham Young has received revelation from God, giving him the right and power to call down the curse of God on all our enemies. We talked for some hours. Suppose an immigrant train came through here, he said. There's the phrase, it's the will of all those in authority that the immigrants must be put to death. So those two phrases attributed to George Smith in regards to Brigham Young, to me, are sufficient to implicate Brigham Young. So regardless of whatever your theory of blood atonement might be and those worthy of death, you need to be a little more refined in applying your principles. The end.